The dossier came in a black folder with no markings on it. Kyle Vorath didn't touch it right away. He let it sit on the table between him and the broker, the way you let a hot coal sit before you decide what to burn with it. The table was made of something that used to have bones. The broker had 3 sets of eyes and the kind of smile that lived permanently on his face, whether he was happy or not. The room smelled like recycled ship air, in something that had died in the vents a long time ago and been left there as a warning. The broker waited. Cal looked at the folder. 3 years of waiting and planning and eating bad food on worse ships had worn him down to something lean and quiet and very still. He didn't look like a man about to make the most dangerous decision of his life. He looked like a man checking something off a list. He picked up the folder. Inside was a single printed page, a name, a posting, a photograph. Admiral Mara Solis, United Human Federation, 7th Fleet, currently stationed at the Crestfall Corridor, commanding from the heavy carrier Perseverance. The photograph showed a woman in her late 40s, short gray-black hair, brown skin, lined around the eyes. She was looking slightly to the left of the camera, like something had caught her attention mid-shot. She looked like someone's aunt. She looked like someone who graded papers at a university. She looked like nothing that should have kept Cale Vorath awake at night for 3 years. She had kept him awake every single night. He put the photograph face down on the table, when the broker spread his hands in the gesture that meant he was about to ask a polite question that wasn't polite at all. "We have discussed the risk profile," the broker said. His translator chip gave him a voice like wet gravel. "A fleet admiral, active posting, full security detail. The Crestfall Corridor is UHF territory, deep coverage, no blind spots we can confirm." He paused. "There are other names, easier names." Kyle said, "I know. Men who wronged you. She wronged me." The broker looked at him for a moment with 2 of his 3 eyes. The third one was watching the door. It always was. "There are those in the syndicate who will say this is personal, that personal jobs go wrong in personal ways." Cale looked at him. "It is personal." He said it the way you state a temperature. Flat. Correct. Not something to argue with. The broker picked up the folder and tucked it into his coat. He would not be the one to lose money over another species grudge. That was somebody else's mistake to make. "We will begin sourcing. Ships first, then crew, then routing." He stood. "You understand that once we begin, the syndicate's involvement remains deniable. I know how it works. And if it fails..." Cal was already looking at the wall. The broker left. Cal had not always been this quiet. There had been a version of him, before, that laughed loudly and argued with his crew over card games and cooked actual food on the ship's hot plate instead of eating ration packs standing up at the console. A version that had believed, with the simple confidence of a man who had never had serious reason not to, that the UHF was worth something. That the uniform he wore meant something. That when he brought evidence of a weapons smuggling operation inside the fleet's own supply chain up through proper channels, something would actually happen to the people responsible. Something had happened, just not to them. The tribunal had lasted 4 days. He had presented everything. Logs, cargo manifests, comm records with the names of 2 senior supply officers who were moving black market ordnance to 3 different border factions. He had been meticulous. He had been certain. The tribunal had found him guilty of falsifying records and conduct unbecoming an officer. He had lost his rank, his pension, his clearances, his quarters on the station where his stuff was still in a box somewhere, probably. His name in the fleet registry changed from active to struck. You went through all of it, through every procedural statement, every carefully worded finding, every moment where the people on that panel looked at their papers instead of at him. Only one person had looked him in the eye. Admiral Mara Solis. She had sat at the far right of the tribunal panel. She had not been the presiding officer. She had not asked many questions, but she had watched him the whole time, with those dark, careful eyes, and when she had signed her name to the finding, she had still been looking at him. Not sorry, not cruel, just watching, like she was noting something down somewhere in her head. He had never been able to make sense of that look. For 3 years, he had turned it over like a stone in his pocket. Had it been guilt? Had it been nothing? Just a face that happened to be pointing in his direction? Or had she known the truth and signed anyway? He didn't know. He just knew that of all the faces from that room, hers was the one that found him in the dark. He spent 4 months building the crew. Not fast. He had learned in the 19 months he'd been operating in Irathi syndicate space, that fast was how you ended up with the wrong people. The syndicate's fringes were full of fast solutions. They had a way of bleeding you out slowly after they solved your problem. He went slow. He found a pilot named Dressen first. Dressen had 7 years of UHF fighter experience before a psych discharge that the official record called voluntary. Dressen called it something that started with the words, "they found out," and then stopped talking. Murray, he was thin and precise, and had the habit of calculating angles with his eyes even when there was nothing to calculate. He was the kind of pilot who didn't need to be told what to do in a crisis, because he was already doing it. He found a weapons tech named Priya, who had learned her trade in 3 different outer system conflicts, and had opinions about targeting systems that she expressed the way other people expressed opinions about religion. She was very small and very loud, and could disassemble a railgun's firing mechanism while arguing about something else entirely. He found 4 more, then 6, then a full crew complement of 37 across 6 ships. 37 people who had been chewed up and discarded by various configurations of authority and had landed in syndicate space carrying it like weight. He didn't tell them it was personal. He told them it was a job. Some of them probably knew anyway. The ships came through a syndicate contact named Ureth, who dealt in vessels with ambiguous histories and asked no questions, as long as the payment came in the currency he preferred and on the schedule he specified. The ships were not beautiful. They were functional. They had the kind of scars on their hulls that came from having been somewhere bad and making it out anyway. Cal found that he trusted that in a ship. The plan itself took 2 months to build and 3 weeks to stress test, and another 2 weeks of Kyle sitting alone with it at 3 in the morning, picking at every seam. The Crestfall corridor was a stretch of navigable space at the edge of UHF territory. Chrysalis' convoy ran the same rotation every 8 weeks. Resupply run from the forward station to the main fleet anchorage. 12 ships down to 6 for the final leg, once they dropped escort elements at the midpoint way station. The route passed through the debris field at Halcyon Drift, dense enough to hide in, open enough to move through, 6 ships against 3, clean angles, a jamming burst to cut their comms. Then it was done. He had run it 100 times in his head. Every time it worked. He told himself this meant it would work. He didn't let himself ask why it felt, somewhere very deep in his chest, like he was walking towards something that had already decided what it wanted to be. 43 days before the operation, a Irathi intelligence analyst named Shev Sul filed a risk assessment. Shev Sul was junior enough to still believe that risk assessments were read by someone. He worked in a gray office on a syndicate station that orbited a gas giant nobody had named because nobody cared enough. He had 6 monitors and a chair that was slightly too tall for his body, and a collection of threat files that he had organized, over 3 years, into a system that made complete sense only to him. He had been assigned to review the operational profile that the broker had submitted when Kale's commission was accepted. He had looked at it for a while. Then he had pulled the existing file on the target. The file on Admiral Maris Solis was not long. This was the first thing that surprised him. High-ranking human military officers, in Shev Sul's experience, generated significant intelligence material. Engagements, decisions, patterns of behavior, predictable responses to pressure. The files were usually thick, layered, easy to read if you knew what to look for. Solis' file was thin where it should have been thick. There were engagement records. She had been in 14 significant military confrontations over her career. She had won all 14, but the records were strange. There were almost no instances of overwhelming force. The victory margins were narrow every time. The Irathi analyst who had reviewed previous engagements had noted repeatedly that she seemed to be using the minimum necessary to win. Like she was calibrating. Like she was not trying to demonstrate capability, but simply trying to solve a problem and then stop. There was a section of the file marked Behavioral Anomalies. He read it carefully. It contained 7 separate incidents from 7 different sources in which Solis had done something that made no tactical sense and had won anyway. In one, she had released a captured Dravathi smuggler who knew a significant portion of her patrol routes. In another, she had called off a pursuit of a hostile force when she had clear kill geometry, simply stopped and let them go. In a third, she had boarded a suspected weapons platform with a crew of 4 when standard protocol would have called for orbital bombardment. Every time the analyst's notes said some version of the same thing. We do not understand why she made this choice. Every time, the outcome was positive. For her. There was a footnote at the bottom of the behavioral anomalies section added by a senior analyst 2 years ago. It was short. It said, "This officer's decision-making does not respond to threat the way human military decision-making is documented to respond. It responds to information. She appears to be solving a different problem than the one in front of her." Shevsol sat with this for a while. Then he went to the back of the file where the classification recommendations were stored. There were 31 annexes. He looked at the classification that had been assigned to Solis's file 2 years ago. It said in the formal Irathi designation, "Do not antagonize. Reasons." See Annexes 7 through 31. He pulled up Annex 7. It was 20 pages. He read all 20. Then he pulled up Annex 8. He read until the end of his shift. Then he kept reading. At the end of his shift and 40 minutes into the next one, he finished Annex 31 and sat back in his chair that was too tall for him and looked at his ceiling for a while. Then he typed up his risk assessment. He flagged the commission as high risk. He cited the anomalous behavioral profile. He cited the do not antagonize classification. He cited his reading of Annexes 7 through 31 and summarized their contents in 2 dense paragraphs that contain phrases like asymmetric threat response and probable intelligence penetration at significant depth and target may be aware of syndicate involvement in operations within her corridor. He submitted it. The risk assessment sat in a queue with 47 other risk assessments. It was not read. Nobody told Kale about the annexes. Nobody told him about the risk assessment either. And the broker who had taken his commission had passed it up the chain to a mid-level logistics coordinator who had assigned it to an operations planner who had routed the ship acquisition through Ureth and considered his involvement finished. The syndicate's fringes ran on compartmentalization. Information that didn't need to move between people didn't. The information about Solis's classification did not move. Kyle sat in the command chair of the lead ship. He had named her nothing, which felt right, and watched the crew run drills for the 5th day in a row. Dressen ran approach vectors. Priya calibrated the jamming suite with the focused displeasure of someone who had been given tools she considered slightly beneath her. The 6 ships moved through empty space in the patterns Kale had designed, and they moved well. In an an, he watched them and let himself, for a moment, believe it. 3 years, 1 decision, 1 signature. He was going to look her in the eye the way she had looked at him. He was going to make sure she understood what she had taken from him, what he had lost, what the weight of those 3 years had actually been. He had not worked out precisely what happened after that. He told himself this was because it didn't matter. Somewhere in the back of his mind, in the part that had kept him alive across 19 months in syndicate space, a voice said, "You should work out what happens after." He ignored it. The crew ran their drills. The ships moved in their patterns. The operation was 38 days away. Everything was going exactly as planned. On the day Kyle finalized his approach routing, a human mercenary named Okoye sat in the briefing room of the lead ship with the other senior crew and listened to him lay it out. She was solid and quiet and missing 3 fingers on her left hand. She had lost them in a border skirmish on the Outer Reach 3 years ago and had replaced them with nothing because she had decided she didn't need them for the things she was good at. She listened to the full briefing, the approach, the jamming, the angles, the target convoy, the timing. She was quiet all the way through. Then Kale said the name, Solis. Okoye went still. Not the quiet that was just her normal quiet, a different kind. The kind that lives in your body when your body has already made a decision and is waiting for the rest of you to catch up. She put her left hand flat on the table, the one with the missing fingers. So she looked at the palm of it for a moment, then she stood up. She walked out of the room without her payment, without her gear allocation, without a word. The door closed behind her. The room was quiet. Priya looked at the door, looked at Kyle. Kyle looked at the door. "She'll be back," somebody said. Kyle said nothing. He filed it somewhere in his head under a label that said cowardice, and he moved on to the next slide. He had a timeline to cover. He had 37 days. He had a name on a photograph face down on a table somewhere in his memory, and it was the only navigation point that mattered. He moved on. The Irathi did not scare easily. They had been moving through the galaxy for 400 years before humans had figured out how to leave their own solar system. They had survived 3 extinction-level wars, A plague that had taken 30% of their population in 8 years, and two separate periods of total governmental collapse that they referred to in their history records as the adjustments. They were not small. They were not soft. They had very long memories and very short tolerance for things that wasted their time. But they had a word that translated roughly as a thing that looks simple but costs you everything. They used it for Mara Solis. The Irathi intelligence officer's name was Drev Hal, and he had been working the UHF border corridor files for 11 years. He had read a lot of files. He had developed over those 11 years a very precise sense for the difference between a human officer who was dangerous and a human officer who was merely powerful. Powerful was easy. Powerful meant resources, firepower, and a political backing. Powerful could be routed around. You could plan for powerful because powerful showed up in clear and documentable ways. Dangerous was different. Dangerous was Solis. He had pulled her full file the morning after the broker's commission came through his secondary review queue. Not because he was assigned to it, because someone in the operations division had sent him a message that said only, "Vorath job. Check the target. No name attached." He didn't ask who it was from. People in his line of work learned quickly that the source of useful information mattered less than the information itself. He opened the file and started reading. The engagement records were the first thing that stopped him. 14 engagements, 14 wins. He had seen files like this before. For aggressive human commanders with good instincts and sufficient firepower who had pushed through bad situations by being willing to accept losses the enemy wasn't. Brutal arithmetic. He understood brutal arithmetic. This was not that. The losses in Solis engagements were low. Not slightly low, remarkably low. In 2 cases, the losses on her side were 0, not near 0, absolute 0. She had gone into a combat situation with a hostile force of documented capability and come out with every ship and every person she had brought in. He had flagged this and kept reading. The behavioral section was where it stopped making sense. He read the incident reports for 2 hours. Each one was documented by a different analyst, from a different station, across a span of 9 years. The conclusions were all different, and the facts were all the same. Solis made choices that were not in the tactical manual. Not aggressive choices, not reckless choices. Choices that looked from the outside like mistakes, and then 3 weeks or 3 months later turned out to have been the only correct move. He read the footnote from the senior analyst again. She appears to be solving a different problem than the one in front of her. He added his own note to the file. This target is not assessed by standard threat matrix. Recommend full operational pause on any commission targeting this officer until a revised framework can be developed. He submitted the note to 3 separate supervisors. None of them responded. He sat at his desk for a while and looked at the wall. Then he went and got himself something to drink and came back and looked at the wall some more. And he did what people in his line of work eventually learned to do when nobody above them was listening. He noted it. He filed it. He let it go. He went home. He did not sleep well. The Dravathi merchant captain's name was Asen Ver, and he had been running cargo through the Crestfall corridor for 22 years. He was old enough to have done business with 4 different human administrations and smart enough to have understood, fairly early, that the administrations changed, but the cargo lanes didn't. You stayed in the lanes and you paid your fees and you kept your head level, and mostly the universe left you alone. Mostly. He had been boarded 17 times in 22 years of merchant work. He had been boarded by Irathi patrol vessels, by independent customs agents with questionable authority, and by 2 pirate operations that had not understood the nature of his security arrangements until it was too late, and by UHF Border Patrol 7 times. The UHF boardings were, in his experience, the most procedurally correct and the least informative. Human officers came aboard, checked manifests, scanned cargo, wrote their reports, and left. They followed the steps. They did it by the numbers. He had found over the years that this was both their greatest strength and the thing that made them most predictable. Solis had boarded him herself, which was the first thing that was wrong. He had been running 6 crates of unregistered medical supplies. Not dangerous, not weapons. Just pharmaceuticals that hadn't been cleared for the outer reach stations because the clearance process took 3 years, and people were dying in the meantime, when the Perseverance's patrol boat had pulled alongside and requested access. He had given access because refusing a UHF admiral's patrol boat access was the kind of decision that simplified your life in ways you didn't want. He had expected officers, junior grade, clipboard approach. Instead, the Admiral herself had come through his cargo lock. Alone, one sidearm, no scanner. She had looked around his hold the way someone looks around a room they've been in before. Then she had sat down on one of his crates, the wrong one, which he would only notice later, and asked if he had anything hot to drink. He had made tea, real tea, actual leaf tea, because he had been trading with a human station for years and had developed the habit. He had given her a cup. She had taken it with both hands, the way humans sometimes did when they were being genuine rather than polite, and she had looked at it for a moment. Then she had told him everything. Not in an aggressive way, in the way that you tell someone the score of a game when they've been traveling and haven't checked. Calm, factual. The 6 crates of unlicensed pharmaceuticals, the route they'd come through, the contact at the forwarding station who'd helped him bypass the manifest flags, the 2 other times he'd run similar cargo in the last 14 months. She knew all of it. He had sat very still and thought about whether to say anything. She had drunk her tea. Then she had stood up and told him he could go. And he had asked why. She had looked at him for a moment, not unkindly. "You're going to tell 6 people what happened here," she had said. "That's worth more to me than your cargo." He had told 60. He had told the story at every port and station and cargo meet he had attended in the 3 years since. Not because he thought she had been kind exactly, not because he was grateful exactly, but because something about the way she had done it, sitting on his crate, holding her tea with both hands, knowing everything and choosing to solve a different problem, had stuck in him like a splinter he couldn't reach. He had told the story so many times that it had become the most reliable opening he had for conversations with other merchants. The Admiral who knew everything and let you go. The Admiral who was running an operation he still hadn't fully understood. He had, over time, come to believe that she was still running it. The stolen tactical manual was old. It had been acquired by a Urathi fleet strategist named Veth So during a period of border negotiation that had technically been a negotiation and practically been a slow-moving intelligence operation. The UHF had eventually noticed and asked for it back through diplomatic channels. The Urathi had returned it. They had kept the copy. Veth So had read it 3 times. She was the kind of strategist who believed that you understood your adversary best, not through their actions, but through what they taught their people. Doctrines were blueprints. They told you how a force thought about war before the war started. Most of the manual confirmed what she already knew about human military doctrine. Aggressive, adaptive, high risk tolerance. The humans had a phrase they used, acceptable losses, that the Urathi did not have a direct translation for because the Urathi did not structure their thinking about conflict around what they were willing to sacrifice. They structured it around what they were unwilling to surrender. The phrase had always told her something important about human commanders. Solis's chapter was different. It was titled Engagement Doctrine for Long Corridor Defense Operations, and it was dry and technical, and she had almost skimmed it. But a phrase in the second paragraph had stopped her. The phrase was, "The goal of engagement is not to defeat the enemy's current position, but to make their next position unavailable." She had put the manual down. She had picked it up again. She had read the chapter 4 times. The doctrine was not about winning the fight in front of you. It was about collapsing the future space your adversary needed to operate in. Not destroying ships, destroying options, not eliminating threats, eliminating the conditions under which threats could organize. It was, Veth So had written in the margin in her own shorthand, the most unsettling thing she had read in 11 years of strategic analysis. Not because it was clever, but clever was common. Because it required a quality of patience that she had not previously associated with human military command. On the ability to let your enemy feel like they were winning while you quietly removed every path forward they hadn't taken yet. She had scrawled in the margin, "She doesn't fight you where you are. She fights you where you're going to be." She had filed the annotation in her personal notes. She had referenced it in the years since, more times than she had referenced almost anything else she had ever written. The briefing room on the lead ship smelled like recycled air and cold coffee. The remaining senior crew, 36 of them now with Okoye's chair empty and nobody touching it, sat around the table while Kyle ran through the final approach timing. He was good at this. The briefing, the layout, the clean lines of a plan that had been thought through from every angle. He had spent months on this plan, and it showed. The crew asked good questions, and he had good answers. And the room had the particular feeling of people who had convinced themselves that a hard thing was possible. That feeling was valuable. Kyle knew that. You needed people to believe in the plan in order for the plan to work. Priya asked about the jamming window. He told her. Dressen asked about the debris field density on the secondary approach vector. He told him. The other crew asked their questions, and he answered them. And the briefing moved forward with the momentum of something that had been prepared for. Nobody said Okoye's name. Nobody looked at her empty chair. Or they did, but only for a second. And then they looked away the way you look away from something your brain has noted, but your mouth has decided not to mention. Kyle finished the briefing. He told them they were 37 days out. He told them to run the approach drills clean. He told them the job was solid and the timing was right, and they were going to move like they had always moved. Quiet, fast, with purpose. He left the room. In the corridor alone, he stopped walking. He thought about Okoye. He thought about her hand going flat on the table, the missing fingers, the way she had stood without saying anything, which was its own kind of saying something. He thought about the 11 years she had been in the mercenary circuit, all the things she had done, and the things she had survived. And he thought about the fact that she, specifically she, with all of that behind her, had heard the name and left. He stood in the corridor for a long time. Then he told himself, cowardice, filed it, walked on. He had 37 days. He had a plan. He had a name on a photograph that was still face down in his memory, waiting. He didn't have room for the other thing. The thing that lived underneath the plan, in the part of himself he had sealed off 3 years ago when the tribunal ended, and he had walked out of that room and kept walking until he had left human space entirely. He had sealed it off because what was underneath the plan was not anger. Anger he could use. Anger was clean. Anger was a tool he had sharpened for 3 years and knew how to hold. What was underneath the plan was something that had been a man once. A man who had believed in something and been taken apart for it. A man who had looked at the face of the person signing his destruction and had searched that face for something. Acknowledgement, regret, and anything, and found nothing he could read. He had built the plan on top of that man, over him, like covering a crack in a wall. He walked to his quarters. He did not sleep. In the 37 days, he was going to get his answer. He told himself that was the only thing left that mattered. He almost believed it. The debris field at Halcyon Drift was the kind of place that made ships nervous. Not the crews, the ships themselves. The hulls groaned at the edges of it, where the gravity pulled in 3 directions at once because 3 dead bodies orbited each other in a slow triangle that would never resolve. Old wreckage floated in the outer ring. Ships from a war that nobody currently alive had fought, broken open and spread across 100,000 kilometers of dark. Some of the pieces were big enough to hide behind. Some of them were big enough to hide inside. Cale had spent 6 weeks studying every scan he could get his hands on. He had found his angles in the 2nd week. He had refined them for 4 more. The plan was this. The 6 ships would enter the debris field from 3 separate vectors, timed to arrive at their positions within 4 minutes of each other. The convoy, 3 frigates running the resupply leg between the forward station and the fleet anchorage, would come through the standard navigation corridor, the one place in the field clear enough for ships that size to move without risk. Cal's ships would be waiting on both sides of that corridor, already still, already cold, running minimal power to reduce their signature. The convoy would sail in between them. Then the jamming burst. And then the 3 frigates would be cut off from everything. No comms to the fleet anchorage, no call for support, no ability to coordinate with each other faster than they could talk directly. 3 ships, 6 guns total, against 6 ships with 12. Then it was over. He had run it 100 times in simulations and in his own head. Every time it worked. The geometry was clean. The timing was achievable. The jamming suite Priya had built was the best piece of equipment on any of his ships, and she had told him, in the flat, confident way she said things she was certain of, that it would cut signal in a 200,000 kilometer radius for 20 minutes before it started degrading. 20 minutes was enough. They entered the debris field on schedule. The 3 entry vectors ran clean. Dressen took the lead ship through a gap in the outer wreckage ring with the kind of quiet precision that made Cale remember why he had hired him. The ship moved like it had been through this corridor before, reading the gravitational pull and adjusting without being asked, slipping between two pieces of old hull that had been drifting toward each other for probably decades and would eventually touch in another century or so. The other 5 ships came in behind in their designated order. No communication between them. They had drilled this enough that they didn't need it. Cal watched the positional display as the 6 icons spread to their designated coordinates and stopped moving. 6 ships, settled, quiet, cold. He checked the time. 14 minutes until the convoy's expected entry at the navigation quarter. He looked at Priya. Once she was at her station with the focused stillness that meant she was paying attention to 17 things at once and didn't want to be interrupted. He didn't interrupt her. He looked at Dressen. Dressen was watching his approach angle display with the small forward lean he always had when he was in a tight space. Not tense, just present, reading the gravity. Cal looked at his own console. He thought about the photograph, face down, the careful eyes, the signature. He made himself breathe. 12 minutes, then 10, then 7. The convoy entry was on time. Kyle watched the sensors as 3 UHF frigates moved into the navigation corridor in standard formation, 1.2 kilometers between them, exactly as the patrol pattern data said they would. Clean, predictable, everything where it was supposed to be. So he nodded to Priya. She hit the jamming burst. The comms board went flat. No outgoing, no incoming, just the internal frequencies of his own 6 ships, still live inside the jamming radius. Kyle opened the internal channel. All ships, confirm ready. 5 confirmations came back in 4 seconds. He looked at the frigates on his display. 3 ships, 6 guns, sitting in his kill corridor. He said, "Move." The first thing that was wrong was the silence. He noticed it at the 3-minute mark, when his ships had closed half the distance to the corridor. The 3 frigates had not moved. They had not broken formation. They had not attempted any of the evasive patterns that a convoy would typically attempt when it realized it was being approached from multiple vectors. They were just sitting there, still, or like they were waiting. Cal told himself this was because the jamming had worked exactly as planned, and the frigates were still processing what was happening, confused, slow to react. This happened. He told himself this. He kept watching. "Priya," he said. "I see it," she said. "They're not moving." "I know. Is the jamming is working." A pause, a very short one. "Our jamming is working." He heard what she meant by the second sentence. He just didn't understand it yet. Then the 4th ship appeared. It came from the debris field on the far side of the corridor. Not from empty space, from inside the wreckage. It decloaked. Not the shimmer of a standard stealth drop, but a full cold cloak release. How the kind that cost a significant amount of power to maintain and a significant amount of skill to hold steady in a gravitational field like Halcyon Drift. It was a destroyer. UHF standard class. Running lights off. Weapons live. Cal stared at it. The 5th ship came from above. Directly above, rising out of a debris cluster that the scans had shown as dead mass and nothing else. Then the 6th. Then the 7th. Then 4 more, in a spread that covered every exit vector from the navigation corridor. Every angle Cal had built his plan around. Every line of approach and every line of retreat covered. 12 ships in total, rising out of the debris field like they had been breathing quietly in the dark for a long time before he arrived. Ships with no registry markings, no identification signal. Ships that, technically, by every record Cale had ever been able to access, did not exist. His comms board lit up. 1 incoming signal, cutting through his own jamming like it wasn't there, which meant they had a different system, a better one that had been active before his ever was. He looked at the signal request for a moment, then he accepted it. The voice was calm. Not the forced calm of someone working to keep their voice level. Actual calm, the kind that lives in a person who has been in enough situations that this particular one does not move them. "Kyle." He sat very still. "You've been in Irathi space for 19 months, the voice said. "I've been watching you build this for 14 of them." The debris field held everything in its slow orbital patience. The 12 ships held their positions. His 6 ships held theirs, because there was nothing else to do. Running was a geometry problem he had already solved in his head in the first 3 seconds of counting the ships, and the answer was no. I want you to understand something, the voice said. I let you finish. All of it. The crew, the ships, the approach routing, the timing. A pause, not for effect, for accuracy, like she was choosing words carefully not to be dramatic, but to be correct. I wanted to see what you had put together. His hands were flat on his console. He was aware of his own breathing. I'm not impressed, she said. The channel stayed open. He could hear nothing on her end. No background noise, no ship sounds, just the particular quality of open air that meant she was in a room, standing still, holding something to her mouth and waiting. What happened inside Kale Vorath in the next 4 seconds was not something that could be put in a report. 3 years, the plan, the months in syndicate space, eating bad food, sleeping in ship bunks that smelled like other people's long trips. The 37 people he had assembled, the 6 ships, the simulations, the approach vectors, the clean geometry, all of it sitting in a kill corridor that she had built, that she had let him build, and underneath all of it, underneath the plan, underneath the cold and the quiet and the careful years, the crack, the thing he had sealed over, the tribunal room in the 4 days, and the evidence he had laid out, and the finding that had come back anyway, the uniform, the name in the registry, her face watching him the whole time. Something broke open, not cleanly, in not the way glass breaks when you drop it, quick and complete, the way something structural fails, a slow split that had been building for a long time and finally reached the point where the material couldn't hold it anymore. He opened the broadcast channel, not just her ship, all channels, every frequency in the jamming radius that his board could reach. He started talking. He couldn't have told you afterward exactly what he said. He knew the shape of it. He told her what she had taken from him. He told her what 3 years in syndicate space looked like from the inside, what it did to a person, what it cost. He told her about the evidence he had brought to the tribunal, real evidence, solid evidence, the kind that should have been enough to bring down 2 senior supply officers and their whole network. He told her what it had felt like to watch the panel look at their papers while he spoke. He told her about the moment the finding was read and what it had done to something inside him that he had never been able to properly name. He told her about the photograph. He told her about looking at her face and seeing her looking back and not being able to read it and spending 3 years turning it over. He told her he had come here to make her understand what she had signed. He told her she had signed his life. His voice was not steady. He had not expected it to be. He had expected, somewhere in his planning, that this moment would feel like the plan completing, that it would feel like relief or triumph, or at least the clean satisfaction of arriving somewhere he had been moving toward for a long time. It did not feel like any of those things. It felt like standing in a hole he had dug himself and realizing the walls were not going to hold. He stopped talking. The channel was quiet. Then her voice came back. 2 words. I know. The silence after those 2 words was different from all the other silences. Priya was not moving at her station. Dressen had both hands on his controls but was not doing anything with them. The rest of the bridge crew were very still. Nobody looked at anyone else. They were all looking at the display, at the 12 ships that had closed the corridor to nothing. Kyle looked at the comms panel. The channel was still open. Those 2 words sat in the air of the bridge, like something with weight. I know, not I'm sorry, not you were right, not here is my explanation. Just, I know. 2 words that landed differently depending on what she meant by them, and he could not tell, sitting in the silence, in the kill corridor, in the debris field, which meaning she was using. Had she known at the tribunal? Had she known later? Had she known for 3 years while he was eating bad food in syndicate space, and she was running the Crestfall corridor with her no-registry ships and her jamming system that cut through his like it wasn't there? He did not ask. He could not ask. Not here. Not like this. Because here was the thing about those 2 words. They did not make the hole smaller. They made the walls of it shake. His 6 ships were sitting in a corridor with 12 guns on them. His 37 people were on those ships waiting for him to tell them something. The operation was not finished. It had not been finished. It had never been going to be finished. Not the way he had planned it. Not the way he had pictured it through all the simulations and all the long nights. And he was sitting in the command chair of a ship he hadn't named, and his hands were flat on his console, and he did not know what to do. The broadcast had gone to every frequency in the radius. Every one of his crew had heard it. He became aware of this, slowly, like cold water coming up around him. He had planned for 37 things, and he had not planned for that. All ships, Solis said, hold position. No one fires unless I say. The 12 ships held. His 6 ships held. Halcyon drift turned slowly in its 3-body orbit, the dead ships of a dead war drifting in the outer ring. And the navigation corridor sat between them all, and nothing moved. It and the channel stayed open. Cal looked at the display for a long time. Then he looked at Dressen. Dressen looked back at him, waiting, asking nothing. That was the thing about Dressen. He calculated angles. He read gravity. He waited for instructions. He was, in the deepest possible way, the kind of person who would follow you wherever you were going, as long as you could tell him where that was. Kyle needed to know where that was. He did not know. She's going to board, Priya said. Not a question. Flat. Kyle said nothing. The channel crackled. I'm coming across, Solis said. Tell your people to stand down. He sat in the chair of the ship he hadn't named. He thought about 3 years. He thought about I know. He said to Dressen, very quietly, stand down weapons. Dressen reached over and put the weapon system to passive. The rest of the bridge crew, one by one, without being asked, did the same. Outside in the debris field, the dead ships of the old war kept drifting. The 3 bodies in their slow triangle kept pulling at each other and never coming closer and never letting go. The boarding tube extended from the Perseverance toward Cale's hull. He sat in his chair. He waited. She came alone. That was the first thing. No security detail. No officers flanking her. No weapons drawn. One sidearm on her hip, holstered, the snap still closed. She came through the boarding tube and into the cargo bay of Cale's ship the way a person walks into a room they have been invited to, not the way a person walks into a room they are taking by force. Her boots were standard fleet issue. Her uniform had no decorations on it beyond rank. She was exactly as the photograph had shown her. Short gray-black hair, brown skin with lines around the eyes, a face that looked like it had considered a lot of things and arrived at its conclusion slowly and without drama. She looked around the cargo bay once. Then she walked toward the corridor that led to the bridge. The 2 crew members who had been standing at the cargo bay entrance. Cale had not ordered them there. They had simply appeared, the way people appear when something is coming and they don't know what else to do. Moved aside without being asked. She passed between them without looking at them, not dismissively, like they were not the thing she had come for. She found the bridge. She walked in. Cale had not moved from his command chair. He had thought in the minutes between standing down weapons and hearing the boarding tube connect about whether to stand, about whether to have his sidearm out, about the 17 different ways this moment could go, and which of them he preferred and which of them he could actually control. He had concluded that he could not control any of them. So he sat in his chair and he waited. And when she walked onto his bridge, he looked at her and she looked at him. And it was, in a terrible way, exactly like the tribunal. Her eyes on him, his on hers. The air between them carrying more weight than the air between 2 people should carry. She looked at the command chair, at him, then she walked to it, unhurried, and stood in front of it in a way that communicated, without any particular aggression, that it was her chair now. Not because she had the guns for it, though she did, because the room had already decided. He stood up. She sat down. She did it naturally. The way you sit in a chair at a table you have been sitting at for years. She put both hands on the armrests and looked at the console in front of her for a moment, and then looked up at the crew. Can you give us the room? She said. It was not a question. The crew looked at Kyle. He nodded once. They filed out. Priya last, and she looked at Kyle on her way through the door with an expression that said several things at once, none of which she was going to say out loud. The door closed. The bridge was quiet. Solace reached into the inner pocket of her uniform jacket and took out a data pad. She set it on the console between them. She did not push it toward him. She just set it down flat and put her hands back on the armrests. That's your court-martial file, she said. He looked at it. The original, she said. Not the official record. The original, with the internal communications attached. The ones that weren't entered into the tribunal proceedings? He said nothing. There are 47 messages in the attachment folder, she said, between the presiding officer and the two supply officers you named in your testimony, before the tribunal. During it, one of them sent the day the finding was read. She paused. You should read them. He looked at the data pad. He did not pick it up. I know what they say, he said. His voice came out level. He had not expected that. I know you do, she said. You knew at the tribunal. That was the problem. You knew and you had the evidence. And the evidence was real, and they found you guilty anyway. She looked at him directly. Not unkindly, the way someone looks at a fact they have been carrying for a long time. Because the presiding officer was being paid, and two of the other panel members were being managed. And the supply chain operation you found was bigger than two officers. It went up 4 levels above them. The bridge held the silence. I didn't know that when I signed, she said. I want to be precise about that. I did not know the full scope of it. I knew something was wrong with the file. There were things that didn't align. Testimony that didn't match the physical evidence in ways that should have been caught and weren't. She stopped. I signed anyway. Because I had looked at the evidence you presented, and I had looked at the panel, and I had made a calculation that turned out to be wrong. Kyle looked at her. What was the calculation, he said? That the investigation would continue after the tribunal, she said. That a finding against you didn't close the supply chain question. That someone with more authority than a panel of 3 would pull the thread. She said the next part without looking away. Nobody pulled the thread. They buried it. And you were already gone. The debris field turned slowly outside. The dead ships of the old war drifted in the outer ring. I pulled it myself, she said. 8 months after your tribunal. It took me 14 months to get to the bottom of it. 6 people are currently in a UHF detention facility. Mach 2 more were removed from their positions and are under ongoing investigation. The supply chain operation is dismantled. She looked at the data pad. Your name is in the follow-up report as the officer who originally identified the irregularities. The record is not expunged. I could not make that happen through channels that wouldn't raise questions about the investigation itself. But the addendum exists. It is permanent. He stared at her. Something was happening in his chest that he did not have a name for. It was not relief. It was not the clean arrival of a long-planned thing. It was something rawer than either of those, something that had been pressed flat for 3 years and was now being given pressure from the other direction and did not know what shape it was supposed to take. You were right, she said, and I was wrong. Then I signed those papers and I was wrong. The words landed in him the way the 2 words from the comms channel had landed, with weight, with a kind of permanence. I have been looking for you for 2 years, she said, not to arrest you, not to bring you in, to tell you that. He looked at her for a long time. 2 years, he said. You move carefully, she said. It took time to find where you'd gone, more time to track the operation you were building without disrupting it. Something moved in her face that might have been the closest she got to Rye. I considered making contact earlier. I decided that intercepting you mid-build would not give you what you needed. What did I need? To finish, she said simply, to bring it to the point where you could see what it was. He thought about that. He thought about 37 people and 6 ships in 3 years of quiet, careful, furious planning and the clean geometry of an ambush that had turned out to be the inside of someone else's operation. You built a better trap, he said. I built the conditions for you to build a trap, she said. There's a difference. You built the trap. I just made sure it closed on the right thing. He sat down on the floor. Not dramatically. His legs just decided that standing was not what they were doing anymore, and he sat down on the deck of his own bridge and put his back against the base of the console and looked at the ceiling. The ceiling of the ship he had not named. The ship he had bought from a man who asked no questions. She did not react to him sitting on the floor. And she stayed in his chair with her hands on the armrests and let him do it. The people I brought, he said to the ceiling, 37, will be released, no charges. Their ships will be escorted to the nearest neutral station. A pause. Priya Sundaresh has 3 warrants outstanding in UHF space. I will not be acting on them. He closed his eyes. Why? Because she came with you on a job that turned out to be about something that had nothing to do with her, Solis said. That doesn't seem fair to hold against her. He opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling for another long moment. Then he looked at her. She was watching him with those dark, careful eyes, the ones that had watched him at the tribunal. the ones that had kept him awake for 3 years. He had spent 3 years trying to read them. He thought he was beginning to understand what they said. They said, "I am paying attention, nothing more, nothing less." She was a person who paid attention to things in the way that certain rare people paid attention, completely without the need to do anything about it immediately, in a way that stored itself and informed everything that came after. She had paid attention to him at the tribunal. She had paid attention to the wrong in the file. She had paid attention for 2 years to a man moving through Syndicate Space Building toward her. She had paid attention, and she had let it cook until she understood what it needed from her. He hated her for it. He hated her the way you hate someone who turns out to have been doing the right thing badly, which is a different kind of hate than the kind you build a plan around. Well, it was not the clean burning fuel of a 3-year grudge. It was something murkier and harder to hold, and he did not know what to do with it. He said, "It doesn't fix it." "No," she said. "The 3 years, what I lost, the people I became." He stopped. "None of that goes back in the box." "No," she said again. Same word, same tone. Not apologetic, not defensive, just accurate, agreeing with something that was true. "Then what is this?" he said. "What are you actually offering me?" She was quiet for a moment. "Nothing," she said. "I'm not offering you anything. I came to tell you what happened because you deserve to know what happened. What you do with it is yours." He looked at her. "That's it. That's it." He sat on the floor of his bridge for a while longer. The 12 ships outside held their positions. His 6 ships held theirs. Nobody was shooting. The debris field turned. He thought about everything. He thought about it for a long time, in the way that you think about something when the shape of it has just changed completely and your mind is still running the old shape through its processes because it hasn't caught up yet. Then he stood up. He stood up and he looked at her sitting in his command chair, and he made his choice. He made the wrong one. Not violently, he did not go for his sidearm. He did not make a threat. He walked to the door of the bridge, opened it, and told Dressen, who was standing in the corridor along with the rest of the crew, in the crowded way of people who had been waiting with nowhere comfortable to wait, to get to the helm. Dressen came in, looked at Solis, looked at Kale. Kale said, "Plot us a course out. Fastest route to the Arathi border." Dressen sat down at the helm. He started calculating. Solis had not moved from the command chair. She was watching Kale with those eyes that paid attention to things. She was not stopping him. She was just watching. "You're running," she said. "I'm leaving," he said. "You know where you're going," she said. "Back to the syndicate. Back to the people who funded this." Not a question. Just tracing the logic. "I know where I'm going." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she stood up from the chair. She picked up the data pad from the console and held it out to him. He did not take it. She set it back on the console. "When you're ready," she said. She walked to the door, stopped. Her back was to him. "The supply officers you identified," she said. "On the ones from your original testimony. One of them broke during the investigation. Gave us everything. Cried, actually. Apparently he'd been carrying the guilt of what happened to you for 3 years." She paused. "I thought you should know someone felt it." She walked out. He stood on his bridge and listened to her boots on the deck of the boarding tube and the seal releasing and the tube retracting. He stood there until his sensors showed the personnel transport returning to the Perseverance. He stood there a little longer. Then he sat down in his command chair, the one she had been sitting in. It was in some way he couldn't account for and didn't want to think about, not entirely his chair anymore. "Course is ready," Dressen said. "Go," Cal said. The ship moved. None of his crew said anything for the first 40 minutes. They ran through the outer edge of the debris field in the same careful quiet they had used coming in, except that coming in had felt like the approach to something, and going out felt like nothing at all, like moving through a space that had no name on the other side of it. Priya came and stood next to Kale's chair after 20 minutes. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, which was its own kind of saying something. He didn't look at her. After a while, she went back to her station. The 12 Solis ships did not follow. They let him reach the outer edge of the field. They let him clear the debris. They let him push to jump distance, which took another 23 minutes of open space. And they held their positions the whole time and watched him go and did not fire a single weapon and did not send a single signal. At jump distance, Kyle looked at his console. The data pad was still there, where she had left it. He looked at it for a moment, Then he reached out and picked it up and held it in both hands and looked at the face of it. The screen was dark. He could turn it on. The court-martial file was in there. His original testimony. The 47 messages between the presiding officer and the supply chain people who had paid for his life. All of it, waiting. He held it for a long time. He put it face down on the console. "Jump," he said. The ship jumped. The debris field at Halcyon Drift held its 3 dead bodies in their slow triangle. The outer ring of old wreckage drifted. The navigation corridor sat empty and clean in the middle of it all, the way it had always been, the way it would keep being long after everyone who had ever had a reason to care about it was gone. The 12 ships stayed until they were certain he was across the border. Then they went back to work. The Arathi High Commission met in a room with no windows. This was by design. The commission had been meeting in rooms with no windows for 200 years because the founders of the commission had believed, with the particular conviction of people who had survived enough political violence to develop strong opinions about architecture, that windows gave people things to look at other than each other. The commission existed to look at each other, at the truths in each other's faces, high at the weight of what was being decided in the careful stillness of eyes that had seen a great deal and were not easily moved. The room had 12 seats. 7 of them were occupied this morning. Kyle Vorath sat in a chair at the far end of the table that was not one of the 12 seats. It was a chair that had been carried in specifically for him. This was a distinction the commission made. You sat in one of the 12 seats, or you sat in the chair that was brought in. The brought-in chair was lower than the 12 seats by exactly 4 centimeters. Nobody ever mentioned this. Everyone always noticed. He had been sitting in it for 22 minutes. He had told them what happened, not all of it. The parts that could be said out loud. The 6 ships entering the debris field on clean vectors. There were the convoy sitting still in the navigation corridor. The 4th ship appearing, then the 5th, then 7 more, out of the wreckage, out of nowhere, out of a debris field that his own scans had shown as dead space. The jamming burst that had cut nothing because her system had been running before his. The voice on the comms. He had told them about the boarding. He had told them she came alone. He had been watching their faces while he said that part. The 7 commissioners, with their 3 sets of eyes each, and their long political memories, and their very short tolerance for things that wasted their time. He had watched something move across those faces when he said she came alone. Not surprise exactly. The specific expression of people confirming something they had already suspected but had hoped was an exaggeration. When he had told them about the data pad, the court-martial file, the 47 messages, he had told them he ran. He did not tell them about sitting on the floor of his own bridge. He did not tell them about the 2 words on the comms channel. He did not tell them about the chair. Some things were his, and he was keeping them. When he finished, the room was quiet for a long time. The senior commissioner, the one in the center seat, the one whose third eye was always slightly more open than the other 2, which meant she was either very interested or very concerned, reached into the document folder in front of her and drew out a single printed sheet. She looked at it. Then she looked at the commissioner to her left, then to her right. A slow look around the table. The way you look around a room when you are confirming that everyone present is going to agree on what happens next. She laid the sheet flat. "The operational file on Admiral Solace," she said, "is being reclassified." The analyst Shevsol found out about the reclassification 3 days later, the way he found out about most things, through a secondary routing notification that nobody else would have read and almost nobody else would have understood the significance of. He was in his office with the chair that was too tall for him and his 6 monitors and the 47 currently open threat assessment files that he kept organized in a system that made sense only to him. He read the notification twice. Then he opened the Solis file, which he had been checking periodically for the past 4 months with the particular attention of a person who had submitted a risk assessment that nobody had read and had been waiting with resigned patience for the universe to make him right. The universe had made him right. He looked at the new classification stamp at the top of the file. Prohibited target, unanimous commission decision. Do not reassign, do not reconsider, do not engage under any operational circumstances. He sat in his too tall chair and read it 3 times. Then he went back to the beginning of his original risk assessment, the one he had submitted 4 months ago to 3 separate supervisors who had not responded. He read through it slowly, his own words, his own careful language, his cited evidence, his conclusion, and all of it sitting exactly where he had left it, unread in a queue with 47 other documents. He added one line to the bottom of the assessment. See Commission reclassification dated this week. Recommend all future assignments involving UHF 7th Fleet Command be routed through Senior Strategic Review before acceptance. He submitted it again. Then he did something he had never done before in 11 years of intelligence work. He walked to the office of his direct supervisor, knocked on the door, opened it without waiting for an answer, and placed a printed copy of his original assessment on the desk. His supervisor looked at it, looked at him. I wrote that 4 months ago, Shefsel said, about the Vorath Commission. His supervisor looked at the assessment, back at him. Next time, Shefsel said, someone should read it. He walked back to his office. He sat in his chair. For the first time in 4 months, he slept well that night. The report on the Halcyon Drift incident circulated through 17 different intelligence networks over the following 6 months. Most intelligence reports moved through these networks with the speed of anything that was technically important and practically ignored. Filed, stored, referenced occasionally when something related came up, mostly sitting in databases that were searched less often than they should have been. The galaxy produced a significant amount of intelligence material. Most of it described things that had already happened in ways that helped predict things that would probably happen. And the agencies that received it used it the way you use a map of a city you already live in. Occasionally, mostly from memory. The Halcyon Drift report did not move like that. It moved fast. It moved the way things move when they contain information that people pass to other people before the formal routing has even completed, because the information is the kind that sits in your chest after you read it and needs somewhere to go. The tactical data was unremarkable, by intelligence network standards. 12 ships against 6, 11 minutes. 6 ships disabled, 0 destroyed. 1 hostile officer departed under observation. No shots fired after initial positioning. From a pure military analysis standpoint, it was a clean operation. Decisive, efficient. It was the attachment that moved. The transcript of the boarding, and the analyst who had first attached it to the report, a junior officer in a Dravathi border intelligence office who had received the raw feed from a listening post near Halcyon Drift, had included it without much thought, the way you include everything when you're not sure what the relevant part is. She had not flagged it. She had not added any annotation. She had just included it and filed the report and gone home. The transcript was read across 17 networks by people who then read it again. It was not long. It was not dramatic. Most of it was 2 people talking in a room in the flat, precise way of people who are being careful with words. An admiral sitting in a command chair that was not hers. An officer sitting on the floor of his own bridge. A datapad on a console between them. And words that had been 3 years in arriving and arrived when they finally came, without ceremony. The analysts who read it reached different conclusions about what it meant. The Dravathi Risk Assessment Bureau wrote 2 pages on it. Their conclusion was careful and formal and used a great deal of technical language and arrived in its final paragraph at a point that could be summarized simply. They had no framework for what they had read. Human military doctrine, as they understood it, was built around the application of superior force to produce a desired outcome. What they had read was something else, an application of superior information used not to destroy, but to place a person in a position where the only available outcomes were chosen by her. Harry, the Bureau's final line read, "We recommend no engagement with this officer under any circumstances where she has had more time to prepare than we have." The Urathi Strategic Division, which had now read all 31 annexes and was feeling the particular discomfort of people who had been given good advice they hadn't taken, wrote a single paragraph. They noted that the Halcyon Drift incident was consistent with documented behavioral patterns. They noted that the outcome, 1 hostile officer released, 36 additional personnel released, 0 casualties, 0 political complications, was the outcome with the smallest possible footprint and the largest possible information value for the UHF. They noted that they did not know and could not determine what information value the Admiral had extracted from the operation or what she intended to do with it. That was the thing that sat in people's chests. Not the 12 ships against 6, not the 11 minutes, not the clean geometry of an ambush that had turned out to be the inside of someone else's operation. The thing that sat there was the not knowing. She had let him go. She had released 36 armed combatants with complete knowledge of a syndicate-funded operation. She had boarded the ship alone. She had given him a data pad and not watched him take it. She had told his weapons tech that her outstanding warrants would not be acted on. None of those were the decisions you made if your goal was the goal everyone could read. They were decisions you made for a goal that was further down the road. A road that bent somewhere out of sight. The Outer Reach Merchant Guild, which had received a copy of the report through its standard intelligence sharing agreement with the Drevity Bureau, sent it to its senior security coordinator with a single attached note. For context, see attached account of the Ossenver boarding 3 years ago. Pattern consistent. The Arathi High Commission's strategic advisor read the circulated report, set it down, picked it up, read the transcript again, set it down again, and then typed a memo to the commission that contained one recommendation. The prohibited target classification for Admiral Solace was to be made permanent, transferable to any officer who occupied her command position, and was not to be reconsidered under any circumstances, including political change in UHF leadership, a deterioration of Arathi-UHF relations, or direct provocation by UHF 7th Fleet forces. The commission approved it without debate. Kel Vorath arrived back in Arathi space on a Thursday. He did not know it was a Thursday. Ship time had a way of drifting from standard time after enough jumps, and he had not been keeping careful track. It felt like a Thursday in the way that the worst days of your life often do, unremarkably without the drama they deserve. Just another day with a number attached to it. He docked at a mid-tier syndicate station orbiting a gas giant that nobody had named. The same one he had staged out of 19 months ago, when he had first arrived in syndicate space with nothing but the cold weight of a 3-year plan and a photograph he kept face down. He was summoned to the commission building within 4 hours of docking. He had known he would be. He sat in the brought-in chair at the end of the table, and he told them what happened. He told them the parts that could be said out loud. He watched their faces while he talked, and he watched something move across those faces, and he understood, while it moved, exactly what it was. He was looking at the face of the thing Okoye had known when she put her hand flat on the table and stood up and walked out of his briefing room without her payment or her gear or a single word of explanation. He was looking at people who had just finished adding up a number they did not like. The senior commissioner looked at the sheet in her document folder. She made the decision. She looked at Kyle. He looked back at her. He was very tired. Not the tired that came from not sleeping, though he had not slept much. The tired that came from carrying something for a long time and setting it down and finding out that you did not feel lighter. That the weight had been doing something structural, that without it you were not sure what shape you were. He looked at the senior commissioner's face and he understood what was coming. He had understood it, if he was honest with himself before he jumped back across the border. He had understood it when he looked at the course Dressen had plotted and said go anyway. He had understood it in the same part of himself that had kept him alive for 19 months in syndicate space by knowing always what a situation was before the situation announced itself. He had come back anyway. He had come back because the only other option was to not come back. And not coming back meant sitting somewhere in the dark with the data pad face down on a console and 3 years of architecture built on top of a crack that had now been opened to the air and was not going to close on its own. He had come back because he did not know where else to go. The commission adjourned. Kyle did not leave the building. The Perseverance came back to the Crestfall corridor 6 days after Halcyon Drift. The corridor was the same. It was always the same. A long, navigable stretch at the edge of UHF territory, deep coverage on both sides, no blind spots that anyone outside the 7th Fleet could confirm. Ships moving through it on schedules that were regular enough to be predictable and defended enough to make predictability a non-issue. Ein Solis stood at the viewport in her quarters and drank coffee and watched the corridor do nothing in particular. This was something she did most mornings when the ship was in a stable position. Not for any operational reason. She had found over years of command that watching a place you were responsible for, just watching it without an agenda, was one of the few things that kept the responsibility from becoming abstract. The corridor was real. The ships in it were real. The people on those ships were real. The coffee was real too. She was particular about the coffee. Her crew had learned over 2 years of serving under her that the coffee situation was one of the few things that reliably produced a specific and mildly alarming attentiveness in an officer who was otherwise difficult to read. The ship's quartermaster had standing orders to maintain a minimum of 40 pounds of ground coffee at all times. Nobody questioned this. Nobody wanted to be on the ship the day the 40 pounds ran out. She drank her coffee. She thought about the data pad, which was probably still face down on a console somewhere, or in a drawer, or in a bin. She thought about a man sitting on the floor of his own bridge. Her comms officer knocked on the open door. 3 Dravathi merchant vessels requesting corridor passage, Admiral. Tell them yes, she said. She paused. And start the kettle, she said. The comms officer noted this, which meant she was expecting company, somewhat, which meant one of the merchants would probably end up sitting across from her in the small meeting room off the corridor with a cup of tea and a slightly overwhelmed expression. The comms officer had seen this happen 4 times. Each time, the merchant had left looking like someone who had been handed something they weren't sure what to do with. Each time, they had told people about it. Yes, Admiral, the comms officer said. She went back to her coffee and her corridor. On her desk behind her, 3 paragraphs of after-action report sat in a folder. She had written it herself the morning after returning from Halcyon Drift, in the flat operational language of someone describing a completed task. Entry into the debris field. Positioning of assets. Engagement without hostile exchange. 1 officer departed under observation. Had 36 additional personnel released to neutral station. No kills, no damage, no battle damage, no prisoners. She had written engagement resolved and considered whether resolved was the right word. She had left it. In the margin of the folder, in her own handwriting, she had written 4 words. Wasn't really about me. She capped her pen and set it down. She picked up her coffee. The intelligence report on Halcyon Drift, the full version with the transcript attached, was eventually filed in the databases of 17 agencies under various classification levels. Most of those classifications degraded over time, as classifications do, and the report moved from restricted to limited to archive to the particular category of archive that meant anyone looking for it could find it, but almost nobody ever looked. So almost nobody. A young Irathi intelligence officer named Tevsol, no relation to Shevsol, though people made the joke, came across it 6 years later while researching historical UHF border engagement patterns for a paper that nobody would read except the 8 people in his division who were required to. He was junior enough to still believe that historical cases contained lessons that senior officers had forgotten or ignored. He was also, by the standards of his division, unusually persistent. He read the tactical data. He read the transcript. He sat with it for 2 days. Then he wrote a footnote for his paper that his supervisor would later remove as outside the scope of the document. The footnote read, "The Halcyon Drift engagement is notable not for its tactical outcome, but for the decision made in its final phase." When the hostile commander, upon receiving information that nullified the basis for his operation, was released rather than detained. 36 additional combatants were similarly released. No material advantage changed hands. From a standard engagement framework, this decision is difficult to justify. From a different framework, one that measures the cost of an action not by what it takes, but by what it leaves behind, the decision is the only one that makes sense. She released them into a situation that was worse for them than capture would have been. She spent nothing and owed nothing, and the other side carried the full weight of the outcome. I have been unable to find a better example in the historical record of what it means to win a thing completely. I recommend this case be included in the standard strategic analysis curriculum. It was not included, but the footnote survived in Tevsol's personal files, where he kept things he thought mattered, whether or not anyone agreed with him yet. He had, in this way, more in common with Shevsol than just the name. The last record in the Commission's operational file for the Vorath Commission was a single line, added by a records clerk who had been handed a sheet of paper by a very tired-looking human man on a Thursday afternoon and told to file it. The sheet contained 1 sentence. The commission closed. Operational objective not achieved. Asset non-recoverable. The clerk had filed it without reading it carefully. The way you file things when there are 47 other things in the queue and the end of your shift was 20 minutes ago, in a different drawer in a different office on the same station, in a file that was not the commission's file and was not accessible through the standard routing system. There was a data pad. Its screen was dark. It had been placed face up. It would sit there for a while, in the dark, waiting with the patience of something that knew the person it was waiting for had not finished yet, that he was moving through the last of the rubble of 3 years of careful architecture and had not reached the other side and did not know what was on the other side and would get there anyway. Went the way people get to things eventually, Not because they are ready, but because standing still stops being an option. The corridor at Crestfall kept moving. The three Dravathi merchants came through it without trouble. One of them, a cargo captain with 20 years in the lanes and a good memory for faces, sat across from the Admiral in the small meeting room and drank tea with both hands around the cup. He told her about a story he had heard, about a man with 6 ships in a debris field, about an admiral who came alone, about a datapad left face down on a console. He told her he didn't understand the ending. She drank her coffee. Most endings take a while, she said. He thought about that for a moment. He nodded slowly. He finished his tea. He went back to his ship. He told people about it.